Yeah, the ability to teach well and the ability to learn well reminds me of something one of my daughters used to say, and that is sometimes a teacher can only do so much. So I'll let you think about that for a while.
So we're looking forward to this so much.
All right, so today, what we want to do, Pastor wants me to hurry up, so we're going to finish this series next week.
I
No, just kidding. But we are going to perhaps finish, if we're good. I think we'll finish this series on the fear of the Lord today. So what I would like to do, just to catch up here a little bit, is this cord is is we're going to look at the fear of the Lord in the book of Proverbs, and it shows up in chapter 1 verse 8 or chapter 1 verse 7 and in chapter 9 verse 10. And usually most people think of 9 verse 10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But in chapter 1, it's the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And I want us to consider specifically what the fear of the Lord is, and from our reading in the book of Proverbs. So hopefully you've had a chance at least once over the last couple of months to read through or listen through the book of Proverbs. It's obviously a very good book to spend time in. I think when I was at Bible college, they would often say, well, if you read a chapter a day, roughly, you read the book of Proverbs through in a month. And therefore, you can read the book of Proverbs through 12 times in a year. And, being humans, you can try that, and after a while, you just read the words and they begin to bounce off. They aren't fresh. But I found that once in a while, when you go back, and you just kind of plow through it, there are always things that stand out. There's a podcast I heard on the Stoics, and the Stoics sought wisdom. And some of the Stoics lived, during the New Testament era, 1st century AD. And they weren't Christians, but they did borrow often from Christians. But one of the things that they would say is if you can take one piece of wisdom every morning, just something small, and then consider it throughout the day, work on it, try to implement it into your life, that over time you will become a better person. And that's all they were striving for. The Stoics were striving for is just you become a better person. For Christians, for believers, the book of Proverbs, and there's other wisdom literature, of course, in the Old and New Testament, but you can imagine doing something even as small as that, taking one of the Proverbs, or that's just a verse, or maybe just a few verses, thinking about that in the morning, and then trying to think about it as you go about your day and applying it as you go throughout your day, as various situations arise. So that's free, but I just thought I'd mention that as a practical tool for implementing Proverbs into our lives and considering wisdom. Okay, so we talked about, and I made the font bigger. We talked about the introduction definitions. We're now talking about the fear of the Lord. And by the end of this conversation today, it should set us up for the next set on knowing God. The next set of conversations. And we're at the end of today, too, we're also going to be able to tweak this definition, all the beliefs one has and how it affects how one lives in the perceived world. So we'll be in a better place to make some changes on that. We asked some questions about the book of Proverbs. Who's teaching? Who is being taught? What is being taught? How is it being communicated? And what must necessarily be true for the one teaching and the one being taught? And we're going to talk about those last 3 questions kind of today. We're going to summarize it in the conversation on the fear of the Lord. we could spend 10 weeks on those questions. We won't, just so pastor's not concerned. All right, so what is being taught? Well, in the book of Proverbs, wisdom is being taught, right? We're trying to teach wisdom, knowledge, instruction, righteousness. Somebody is trying to teach that to somebody else. And we looked a little bit at who the people were who was teaching, the people who are listening or are supposed to be learning, but in some cases don't, like the fool, for example, doesn't learn wisdom, has no desire for it. So just by way of a kind of introductory question, how do you teach something like wisdom to somebody else?
Use words.
Okay.
Speak.
Sometimes you have to use words. No.
You have to be, you have to have that when you teach.
Okay, so it helps if you have some wisdom in order to teach wisdom. Okay, it's a good point.
Example.
Okay, by example. And I think Randy mentioned this last time, if I can pick on Randy, that you sometimes, if I ask the question, how do you know if somebody is wise? Well, you watch the decisions that they make, and you say, well, that was a wise decision. This person comes into these situations, and when they come into these situations, they make wise decisions. And therefore, you know that this person has wisdom. Okay, so it's kind of how we figure that. So it's often by example. And you see that often in the book of Proverbs. This came up in a conversation this last week about, I was talking to my neighbor yesterday, and it's one of those things, I borrowed a tool, so I had to bring it back to his shop, and then he's like, here, sit down, let's talk. He was talking about, a little bit, we were talking about worldview, and just how some people, the way they live, they're inside their mind, it's very messy. They don't have a good understanding of the world around them, unsaved people. And you see how it works out in the way that they live, because their lives are very messy and very chaotic. But it's a reflection of what's going on inside. All right, so by how we teach, sometimes we have to use words, sometimes it's by our example. We have to have wisdom ourselves. So it's assuming that we are seeking out wisdom. And we mentioned last time as well, the wise in verse 5 will hear and increase in learning. A wise person never attains to, Solomon's status. A wise person knows that they always have something else to learn. They're always pursuing it. They're always striving to become wiser and to have better discernment in what they're doing. Okay, so we'll look at the fear of the Lord in particular. Now, you might remember, you might not, but that's okay. You might remember that the book of Proverbs, we say it's the Proverbs of Solomon. Chapters 1 through 9 were written by Solomon as one literary unit designed to be read start to finish. Okay, so Proverbs 1 through the end of chapter 9 is one unit. Chapter 10 starts the Proverbs of Solomon as we think of them. Little sayings, one verse, maybe 2 verses long, maybe a few verses long, but they're short, they're sweet. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest you become like him. These little sayings. Okay, that starts in chapter 10. And then towards the end of the book, we have other authors who are brought in as well. So what I did is I pulled out the fear of the Lord references, and these actually isn't even all of them, but from chapters 1 through 9. And I just kind of summarized them here. So Proverbs 1:7, which we read, says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. So that's why I put up there. Okay, so what is the fear of the Lord? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. If you want to become wise, you must start with the fear of the Lord. That's what verse 7 says. You must start with the fear of the Lord. Now, chapter 1, verse 29, chapter 1 and verse 20, wisdom begins to speak. And it says in verse 20, wisdom cries aloud in the street, in the markets she raises her voice. And when we get down to verse 29, verse 28, well, actually, I guess we'll back up. Okay, let's start at verse 20. So, chapter 1, verse 20, wisdom cries aloud in the street, and in the markets she raises her voice. At the head of the noisy streets she cries out. At the entrance of the city gates she speaks. How long, O simple ones, will you love being simple? We talked about the simple last week. How long will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing and fools hate knowledge? So it's hard to teach simple ones. It's hard to teach scoffers. It's hard to teach fools. Verse 23, if you turn at my reproof, behold, I will pour out my spirit to you. I will make my words known to you, because I have called and you refuse to listen. Have stretched out my hand and no one has heeded, because you have ignored all my counsel and would have none of my reproof. So wisdom is crying out on the street. Simple people, fools, scoffers, they're walking by. She's telling them, I have a message for you to turn you to the right way. And they're just going by. Okay, so the simple won't grab onto it. The scoffers are scoffing at her. The fools don't want anything to do with her. And she says, because of that, even though I'm trying to get your attention, verse 26 says, I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when terror strikes you. So as they go on, they're going on into bad situations, the consequences of their own choices, the consequences of their own foolish choices. And wisdom says, I'm going to laugh at you when this happens. When terror strikes you like a storm and your calamity comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you, then they will call upon me, but I will not answer. So this is the what do they call it?
Personification of it.
Yeah, personification of wisdom. She's saying, so eventually the calamity will get so bad that you will seek me, but it's going to be too late. Okay, you've dug a hole that you cannot get out of. And wisdom can no longer save you from the consequences of your foolish choices. So she says, they will call upon me, verse 28, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently then, but they won't find me. It's too late. It's too late. Because, why won't they find me? Because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord. So in 1 verse 29, a person who fears the Lord is a person who loves wisdom. Okay, so a person who fears the Lord is someone who loves wisdom. Proverbs 2:5 is similar. He says in verse 4, going back to chapter 2, verse 1, 2 verse 2, my son, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments with you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding. Turning, in other words, your disposition, I've used that word before, is toward wisdom. You might still be somewhat foolish, you might still be somewhat young, you might still be somewhat simple, but your inclination, you're inclining your heart towards understanding. Verse 3, yes, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and search for it as hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. So we said that the fear of the Lord comes first if one would want to have knowledge. And chapter 9, verse 10, if someone wants to have wisdom, they must fear the Lord. In order to fear the Lord, we have to want it. There has to be a desire for knowledge, for wisdom. If we have that knowledge, then we learn what the fear of the Lord is. I mean, if we have the desire, then we will come to know what the fear of the Lord is, which will then lead to knowledge and wisdom. and discernment and understanding and so forth. Now in chapter 3, and then you'll notice there's a gap there, chapter 3 and then chapter 8. Chapter 3 verse 7 says, "Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord," so here it's a command. "Fear the Lord and turn away from evil." So in the parallel of the statement, fearing the Lord results in turning away from evil. A person who fears the Lord then turns away from that. So there's a seeking of wisdom, there's a seeking after knowledge that comes from the fear of the Lord, but there's also a turning away from evil. In Proverbs 8:13, you flip over there, says, "The fear of the Lord is hatred of evil, pride and arrogance, and the way of evil and perverted speech I hate." And that's wisdom speaking there. Wisdom hates pride, arrogance, and the way of evil and perverted speech. And the fear of the Lord hates evil. So there is something to be hated. We often talk about God is love. We often talk about the Christian life is all about love. And there is something else, though, that is about to be hated. Now, if you've read C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy, I think it's in the first one, Out of the Silent Planet, he has got a great picture of what hatred is for, the right kind of hatred. Another story I heard not too long ago, I listened to a lot of podcasts by military, people who've been in the military. And one of them was, I think maybe I mentioned him last week, but because it's fresh in my mind. He was a Navy SEAL, and in one of his first deployments, or in his first deployment, one of his first assignments, they were over in Iraq, or Afghanistan. They were in Afghanistan, and he was holding a perimeter. So he was a machine gunner, and he was one of a few machine gunners who had set up a perimeter, and they were there to rescue some soldiers who were injured. And so they were setting up a zone for a helicopter to be able to come in and evacuate these wounded soldiers. Well, they weren't there very long, and they hear on the radio that the Taliban are on their way to their location. So everyone's on high alert. Everyone's waiting. And soon, there's a line of trees off in the distance, and soon he sees some activity in that line of trees. And he's waiting. He's waiting for the Taliban soldiers to come out of the trees. And he waits, and he waits, and then everything settles down, and two little girls, about 8 and 10 years of age, come running out of the woods. No soldiers. Little girls wearing little backpacks that were known to be suicide vests. These soldiers didn't want to face the Americans. They knew the Americans didn't want to shoot little girls. And so they were going to blow up these little girls in order to blow up the American soldiers. Or they were going to make the American soldiers shoot the little girls, and then they were going to do the propaganda. Look at these mean Americans over here killing our little children. So this guy is sitting there with his gun trained on these girls, and he starts yelling at them. Go back, turn around, go back. He said they're getting closer and closer. He has his finger on the trigger, pointed right at them. He's got the trigger half squeezed because he knows he can't let them get too close. He can't let them blow up. He would die, all of the soldiers would die. He can't let them get that close. He kept yelling at them, go back, and finally the older of the two stopped, grabbed the little one, and they turned and they ran off, and he didn't have to shoot them. He was so angry because, and he said, and he almost quoted from C.S. Lewis, I knew what hatred was for at that moment in time. I knew what anger was for. That someone would actually do that. This evil that was just unimaginable. He never thought that any human being could do that to another human being. and that is the hatred of evil. We hate evil. We hate evil things. And that is a right thing. That is a good thing, according to Proverbs. All right. Then the last one, Proverbs 9, verse 10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is insight. And this kind of concludes the book, or these first 9 chapters, the Proverbs of Solomon, as a whole. So what do you notice? What do you, just by looking at that outline there, that sketch, what are some observations that you make from that? It's okay. You can.
They're all good things.
They're all good things? Oh, okay.
Wouldn't you say wisdom doesn't come just kabang? It's a process.
Okay, wisdom doesn't come kabang, is the theological word. Yes, correct. It's a process. So, and I mentioned this, I think, when we were studying the book of Hebrews. Anytime I'm teaching a class, we get to the end of the class, and I say, okay, now that we've got to the end of the class, we don't know everything. We just have better questions to ask when we go back and study the same topic over again. Right? So wisdom is a continuing process. And therefore, it should be that the older we are, the more wisdom we have. Now, it's not always the case. I won't look at anyone in particular unless you think I'm making a judgment, but it should be the case, right, that the older we are, and that's one of the reasons that young men are mentioned in the beginning of the book. It should be something we're increasing in over time. Jeremiah, you had put your hand up.
For the additional question, a lot of it has to do with God and morality, what's right, not just common sense.
Okay, so a lot of the wisdom that we're looking at, it's rooted in God. It's not just common sense. I mean, the fear of the Lord is the beginning, and the end in this case, of what we're after. So God is very much a central part of it. It's not just common sense. I mentioned the Stoics earlier. A lot of the wisdom of the Stoics is common sense. Some of it can be traced back to Proverbs and the scriptures, but some of it is just common sense. But our wisdom is rooted in God himself. Okay, well, I'll point out a couple things since you're being shy. So you'll notice that chapters 1 through 9 as a unit, it begins and ends with the fear of the Lord is the beginning of. Okay, so that does kind of give us some bookends. You'll notice that the next two on the top, Proverbs 1 and Proverbs 2, in order to get to having the fear of the Lord, we have to start by wanting it. Right? We have to love it, we have to seek it. We have to mine it out like silver. We have to go after it, or because it doesn't happen kabam. Wisdom can yell at us all she wants, but unless we're after her, unless we're seeking after it, then it's not going to happen. And then you'll notice Proverbs 3 and Proverbs 8 have to do negatively with a hatred of evil and a turning away from evil. So there's two sides to that coin. It's not just striving after wisdom and all that comes with it, but it's also turning away from evil. So the fear of the Lord then has kind of the two faces to it, and it's turning away from evil and turning towards wisdom. Now, if I asked you this question, what is the fear of the Lord? If we're going to try to define it, how do you think we would define the fear of the Lord? Keep using the phrase.
I think we heard something about this in Ecclesiastes, didn't we?
Yeah, you would have heard something about this in Ecclesiastes, chapter 12 probably in particular.
Mine has a lot to do with the realization of who God is and what he is, his attributes, and so forth.
Okay, so realization of who God is. his attributes?
My study notes here say the foundation of knowledge is to fear the Lord, to honor and respect God, to live in awe of his power, and to obey his word.
Okay, so Cindy has written down in her Bible, no, it's in your notes. To honor, can you say that again? To honor and?
To honor and respect God, to live in awe of his power, and to obey his word.
Okay, yeah, so to honor and respect God, to live in awe of him, and then the third one was to live in obedience. Okay, so one of the so that's not too bad. It's not too bad of a definition. When you think of awe or honor or respect, there's, I think, in our society, because of democracy, we're all equal in America. The idea of honor is often lost on us. So that's one reason in the military, still today, I think there's, although they're trying to get rid of it there too, right? There's still honor in the military. So what is one of the worst things that can happen to you, for example, if you're a Marine and you're discharged? One of the worst things you can be discharged as a Marine for is conduct unbecoming, right? Conduct unbecoming a Marine is one of the worst things you can be discharged for if you're a Marine. It means that you didn't behave yourself like a Marine. Marines got a code of conduct. And if you don't act like one, then you don't deserve to be one. And they kick you out. There is a sense of honor among the Marines in that regard. There is, in some societies, there is still very strong sense of honor. So when I was in high school, I studied Taekwondo for a year, and I had a Korean master from South Korea. And he and his brothers had a couple different schools in Illinois. And he instilled into us a sense of honor. Where you wear shoes and where you don't wear shoes. You bow to the flag upon entrance to the building as soon as you enter the room. You never turn your back on someone who is higher rated than you, including your master. So in other words, this is, if you're dismissed, you bow, you take 3 steps backwards before you turn around. Because it would be dishonorable to just turn your back on the person who is superior to you. You also don't look at them in the face. So I had a hard time with this because he instilled so much honor in me for these things that one day we were doing a drill and he called me up to the front. And he sparred with me. And the drill was, he was supposed to try to kick me, I was supposed to block it, and I was supposed to kick him. Well, wait a minute. I'm supposed to kick my master? How could I raise a hand, in this case a foot, to my master? So what happened? He stood up across from me, we bowed, and he kicked me in the head. And so I got up, and he's like, let's do it again. Okay. So I stood there, and we bowed, and he kicked me in the head again. And I got up again, and he said, let's do it again. I'm like, but I was stuck. I had this mental block that he actually didn't understand. He thought I just wasn't very good. But I had this mental block that I'm actually supposed to strike out at him. And how could I do that and maintain this sense of honor? It's not like I was actually going to kick him, right? But I was supposed to try. So when we talk about things like honor and respect and awe, these things are difficult concepts in our world today to try to get our mind around, but they're very important when we're talking about the fear of the Lord. Now, some people will say, we'll be quick to say, it's not afraid, right? We're not afraid of God. Exodus 19 is when the people of Israel get to Mount Sinai. You might be familiar with this story. And God says to Moses, he comes down on the mountain like a thunderous cloud, there's lots of loud noise, there's lightning, and he says, don't let the people of Israel come near the mountain or touch it, put up a fence. If an animal walks on there, it's going to die, don't go after it, all these things. And Moses tells us that the people were afraid. And they didn't want God to talk to them. That was too scary. Okay? The fear of the Lord that we're talking about here is not being afraid or scared of, but it is the sense that if we don't pay attention, right attention to God, then there are a couple possible circumstances. One is judgment. So you can consider, I was the third born in my family. Yes, the youngest. Youngest are always spoiled. And one of the things that taught me wisdom as a small child was when my brother and sister got in trouble. And I said, I don't want that to happen to me, right? Because judgment came down. They didn't fear my dad in this sense. And judgment came down. They didn't turn away from evil because they feared him. And judgment came down. And I saw that and I said, yeah, I'm not doing that. That was kind of a healthy fear in some case, to some extent. But it's also that sense of safety. There's a great passage, again, C.S. Lewis, Chronicles of Narnia, in the first book written, where Aslan, does anyone not know the story? Okay, you're dismissed. So, yeah, you can go read it.
This is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Yeah, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And Aslan, no, the movie doesn't do it. But the Pevensie children are hearing about Aslan, and they don't know who Aslan is. And then they find out he's a lion. And one of them says, but is he safe? And Mrs. Beaver says, or Mr., I don't remember, I think it's Mrs. Beaver says, absolutely not. He's not safe. He's not a tame lion. He's a lion, but he's good. And we've seen this in the book of Numbers. Pastor mentioned it again today. All of this protection, because God is in your midst. God is good. He has redeemed you out of Egypt. He has brought you out here. He has sustained you in the wilderness. God has provided everything and absolutely everything that you need. He is in your midst. He has made a covenant with you as a people. He is good. Okay, but don't touch the ark for any reason. Don't offer strange fire in the tabernacle for any reason. If you are the high priest, you do not touch a dead body, even your closest relative, for any